Coming up, John Morant and Bradley Beal will their teams to a win. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA. Local experts joining us to go over the biggest stories on the hardwood. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Washington Wizards picked up a road win behind Bradley Beal's 37 points, just enough to beat the Hawks in Atlanta. Our Locked On hosts from both teams go over that final.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards. The Washington Wizards get a huge and much-needed victory tonight in the ATL. 119-116, beating the Atlanta Hawks, led by 37 points by Bradley Beal, the real deal Beal. The franchise player for the Washington Wizards led the way tonight, shooting 16 for 29 from the field, 1 for 4 from three-point. But what other factors led to this win for the Washington Wizards? Man, easy. They controlled the paint. They owned the paint. 48 rebounds, 16 offensive rebounds, 66 points in paint, and 22 second chance points. So owning the paint was the recipe for success for the Washington Wizards tonight. So player of the game tonight has to be Bradley Beal, 37 points again. Now, defensive player goes to Daniel Gafford with 1 steal, 3 blocks. So again, a much needed victory for a Washington Wizards team that are trying to drive for a playoff spot in the second half of the season. So everybody have a good night and appreciate y'all watching. Peace.
Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland. The Atlanta Hawks start out the Quinn Snyder era with a narrow loss on this Tuesday evening, falling to the Washington Wizards by a 3-point margin. The Hawks had 2 shots in the air from Trae Young in the final seconds that would have tied the game, but they both went begging, and really Atlanta let this one get away in a lot of different ways. The Hawks had been leading comfortably, or at least somewhat comfortably, for most of the way, and then the Wizards had a big run, 15-4, down the stretch. And Bradley Beal was honestly the best player on the floor in the fourth quarter of this game. Trae Young struggled down the stretch despite having some quality performances in the first 3 quarters of this game. And in the end, the Hawks didn't have quite enough to get over the line in Snyder's debut. There'll be brighter days ahead for the Hawks, of course, as you can sort of emerge from this game with some optimism about the way things are going. And the vibes are still pretty good around the Hawks at this point in time. But they are still 500 for the season, 31-31 at the end of this one. We'll have a full breakdown of this game and much more on Locked On Hawks podcast.
The Bucks pulled away in the fourth quarter in Brooklyn behind Giannis's 33 points to go along with his 15 rebounds in the Milwaukee win. Locked On Bucks and Locked On Nets give us takes from both sides in New York.
15 straight wins for the Milwaukee Bucks. They finished February 10-0, just the 4th time in franchise history. They go through a calendar month undefeated. My name's Kane Pittman. I'm the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. Last night it was the Daily Show. Tonight the show was on the Barclays Center hardwood for Giannis. He finishes with 33 points, 15 rebounds, and put on a dunking exhibition all over the Brooklyn Nets. It was a delight to watch if you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan, and they were very comfortable in the end. Down double digits early, they close it out and win 118-104. Chris Middleton continues the very slow ramp up, just 23 minutes, but he put in an efficient 18 points in that stretch. Overall, the Bucks are just looking to continue to build the chemistry on the road to the postseason. You love the winning streak, but more than anything, you love seeing these groupings together on the floor. Check out the Locked On Bucks podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Doug Norrie, Locked On Nets coming at you following a 118-104 loss by Brooklyn to the Milwaukee Bucks. The Nets started this game strong, looked really good in the first half, causing havoc on the defensive end, really showing you signs what the team might be able to look like in the post-Kevin Durant era. Mikal Bridges is able to put up 31 points in the loss, but ultimately Giannis and company are too much for this Brooklyn team. They got going downhill in the second half when Milwaukee put up 66 points to the Nets just 42, and the game was over with a few minutes left to spare. We're going to be taking a look at what the Nets did tonight, what went well, what went not so well, what we can expect from this team going forward. We'll talk Mikal Bridges and whether or not he can be a 30-point-a-game scorer moving forward with his career, what to make of Cam Thomas, and really what to make of the rest of the season for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll be doing that all over at Locked On Nets.
The Raptors won a battle of playoff positioning in Toronto, taking care of the Bulls in the fourth quarter. Locked On Raptors goes over that win, while Locked On Bulls says that this loss is a big blow to Chicago's postseason hopes.
Don't look now, but the Toronto Raptors might have options. Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors to break down the Toronto Raptors 104-98 win over the Chicago Bulls on Tuesday night to win their 8th of their last 10 and finish 8-3 in the month of February. And the big takeaway from this one is that the Raptors showed for one of the very first times all season at full health finally, with Jakob Poeltl now in the mix, Fred VanVleet back from a personal absence from after the All-Star break, OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr. back and healthy as well and finding their groove. The Raptors now have different ways that they can win basketball games. Their offense tonight was really grim, but their defense against the Chicago Bulls was outstanding. Scotty Barnes had himself a massive block fest in the fourth quarter, 4 blocks in the game for the Raptors sophomore. And while the Raptors have leaned on Jakob Poeltl quite a bit since he's come back, he didn't even have to close this game as the Raptors went small to juice up their offense, and they ended up pulling out the win nonetheless with a strong defensive closing. The Raptors have been playing one way all season long, which is ride the margins, play defense, get turnovers, and hope to score in transition while hoping the defense can hold up. It's not worked out so well for them so far, but with Jakob Poeltl and some health, this team finally has different ways to win. I'll have more broken down on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Raptors. Be sure to tune in.
The Chicago Bulls lose a game that had huge playoff implications. I'm Pat the Designer from Locked On Bulls, and the Bulls came into this one and needed to get a win versus a team that sits in 9th ahead of you in the playoff standings. And you would think, right, when you hold a team to shooting 40% from the field, you would be able to go out there and get a win. But the seeming, I don't know another way to say it, ineptitude on Billy Donovan to not go to or not go away from a small ball lineup, I should say, costing the Chicago Bulls on the boards. The length of the Toronto Raptors was on display as they out-rebounded the Bulls not only by 12, but 19-6 on the offensive boards. Absolutely a dominating performance from the Toronto Raptors on the rebounding front. Tune in with me and Hayes as we break down more of this over on Locked On Bulls tonight. Y'all stay safe out there, Chicago. Peace.
Coming up, the Spurs finally snapped their losing skid. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. This edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by FanDuel. We are at the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time for you to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So you just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy for you to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes that are drained in the game. The Lakers are slim favorites right now against the Thunder on Wednesday as they look to bounce back after they lost to Memphis on Tuesday night. FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay, so if you find other things that are interesting. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you once again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. John Morant took over for the Memphis Grizzlies against the Lakers on Tuesday night. He finished with a triple-double, nearly 40 points in the Grizzlies win. Memphis stays hot at home, and LA takes another hit to its playoff hopes. Our Locked On hosts from both teams give us their sides of things.
Riddle me this, Locked On Grizzlies Now viewer, listener, beloved. How do you win a basketball game when shooting 19.4% from beyond the arc? The answer? Have Ja Morant on your basketball team. I'm Joe Mullinax of Locked On Grizzlies, and holy crap, Ja Morant is really freaking good at basketball. A triple-double on the board, almost a 40 burger, 39 points. This guy did not make a single three-point shot. 15 of 24 from two-point land. And the most impressive part of it was the first half was not Ja's friend, nor was it the friend of the Grizzlies. Memphis was down 49-46 at halftime. And then a third quarter explosion from Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and the rest of the team helped put this game away alongside a holding serve in the fourth and final frame. Memphis is heading out on an important 4-game road trip. This was a wonderful way to end their time at home with Ja Morant and company, reminding the West they're a force to be reckoned with.
Zane Kamenetsky, co-host of the Locked On Lakers podcast, and the Lakers lose 121-109 to the Grizzlies in Memphis. Tough sledding for the Lakers, playing without LeBron James or D'Angelo Russell. They made a serious game of things to begin. The first half, they finished up 3, anchored by serious, really aggressive, disruptive defense. Anthony Davis was in the middle of all of that, but a 28-point third quarter by Ja Morant plus 26 turnovers on the game, which resulted in 41 Memphis points. Just way too much to overcome on a night where the Lakers just have very little margin for error. They showed some really good resolve with their circumstances moving forward. LeBron out for the foreseeable future, but they simply have to cut down on those type of mistakes. A lot more to get into, so make sure you are subscribing to Locked On Lakers YouTube channel and that you make Locked On Lakers your first listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Pacers took a lead into the fourth quarter in Dallas and then barely held off Luka Doncic and the Mavericks come back. Locked On Pacers looks at what made the difference for Indiana in the win.
Big road win for the Indiana Pacers, who go into Dallas and beat the Mavs 124-122. So many things can be pointed out as the biggest thing for the Pacers in this game, but the lead has to be free throws. 40 attempts for the Pacers. That's their most in a single game this season. First time reaching 40 all year. 15 from Tyrese Haliburton. That was a career high. Tyrese Haliburton led the team in shot attempts as well. He was hunting his looks and punishing the Mavs. He finished with 32 points. Buddy Hield had 9 free throw attempts. That ties his career high. That was huge for the Pacers. They made 13 more than the Mavs in a 2-point win. That was a huge difference, but also down the stretch, the Pacers defense got it done. They could not get stops all night, but for the last 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 13 seconds really, Dallas does not hit a shot. They only score free throws, and the Pacers get it done. Their second win in a row, both on the road, finally hitting a little groove after a brutal rough patch in January and February. We'll have more on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
The San Antonio Spurs' 16-game losing skid is finally over. San Antonio managed to beat the Jazz in Utah on Tuesday. Our Locked On Jazz host tells us what went wrong as they allowed San Antonio to get a long-awaited win.
The Utah Jazz had a chance to vault themselves to 6th in the Western Conference standings with a win over the San Antonio Spurs, who had not won a game in 42 days. That would be too easy. And the Jazz did not do it. They lost 102-94. David Locke of Locked On Jazz. The Jazz had their worst offensive game of the entire season. Maybe not surprising. Without Jordan Clarkson and without Colin Sexton, the Jazz simply didn't have anyone on the floor who could go get a bucket in that one-on-one type of guard play. And in the fourth quarter, that came to fruition as they scored just 21 points in the fourth quarter. Jazz scored just 18 points in the second quarter and 25 points in the third quarter. This one was not pretty. At one point in time, the Spurs' performance was in the second percentile of all offenses and was heading toward being the worst single offensive performance by any team all year. And they won. That's all you need to know from Salt Lake City.
Russell Westbrook has not been the savior thus far for the Clippers. They are 0-3 since he joined their team. Their latest loss to Minnesota. Locked On Timberwolves is in to go over their win.
Just when you think the Timberwolves are down and out, they give you a reason to believe once again. I'm Ben Beacon, host of the Locked On Wolves podcast. The Timberwolves held on to beat the LA Clippers by 7 on the road on Tuesday. They were led in terms of points by Jaden McDaniels with just 20. Anthony Edwards had only 18 points on 18 shots, struggled from the field, but came up with some of the biggest plays of the night defensively. Both Edwards and McDaniels were awesome on the perimeter against a full-strength Clippers team that had both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and Russell Westbrook with a near triple-double as part of the Clippers starting lineup. But when it came down to it, the Wolves were up by 10 with a couple minutes to play. Then it was down to 5 after Paul George got hot late in the game. 5 points with just about 40 seconds to play. Ant gets a hockey assist to Kyle Anderson, then a bounce pass to Rudy Gobert for a dunk. And Ant as a playmaker and as a defender is really what the difference in this game was, and some clutch shooting from McDaniels and others. We're going to talk all about it on the post-game podcast. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you once again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NBA and your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.